All right, you're very welcome along to another special OTB AM interview. The guest I have for you this afternoon is coming live from Ohio. So it's Tommy Byrne. You may have seen a documentary around Tommy's life. He's a former top-class Irish motorsport driver, performed well in Irish Formula 4 championships. He won the British Formula 3 championship in 1982. An astonishing record. He's been quoted by the likes of Eddie Jordan as up there with the likes of Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher for talent. And quite an interesting life off the track as well, it has to be said. Tommy, first of all, thanks a lot for taking the call. Reading up on yourself, you are someone who, it's fair to say, had a need for speed at a very young age, because when you were born, you're from Dundalk originally, but when you were born, you kind of you came out in the back of a car. So can you tell us a little bit about that and about how it kind of stemmed from there and became an obsession for you, this speed and a life of motorsport?
Well, thanks for having me, Shane. I appreciate it. Welcome from Ohio. I was born in the back of the car. I didn't make such a big deal out of it when I was doing my early racing, my career. I should have, maybe more. But I've been asking my sister, because my mom's dead now, my dad's dead, so we didn't talk about that much. So I guess I said, so who took me to the hospital? I mean, whose car was it? So it turns, because there was only one car like in the neighborhood. So it turns out it was Mrs. Meehan. She took me to the hospital with my mom and my aunt, and I was born on Tullyesker Hill on the way down the hill on the way to Drogheda. And then I was into cars. I just love speed. I love cars. I love anything that rolls, like go-karts and little push go-karts. I had my brother push me around in a push go-kart when I was 4. Just anything to do with that. Tractors, and I worked on a farm when I was a kid just because to get to drive the tractors. And then I went to Mandela Park in 1976, and it was John Murphy's, the Mandela Park driving school at the time, racing school in Formula Fords. And I had no license. I didn't need one at the time. I did 17 laps, I think, or 15 laps. And it was 15 pounds or punts at the time. And I spun, it was raining, and I spun 7 times out of the 15 laps. And for some reason, after that, I just knew what I wanted to do. Before that, I just wanted to be a mechanic. I wanted to come to America and be a mechanic, welder mechanic. And that was my goal in life. I love mechanicking. And once I did that Formula Ford around Mandela Park for those 15 laps, I just couldn't sleep until I became a race car driver.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Mandela Park there, and I know I'm looking up the website there recently. I think they've the new website, mandelapark.ie, and I know anybody can drive that track themselves by doing, a driving distance themselves or paying for laps. And I know that's something you would have done when you were younger. How important was Mandela Park as a place for you? Because I know it's probably, if Croke Park is the home of GEA, if the Crucible is the home of snooker, Mandela Park really is the home of racing in Ireland.
Well, there is only Mandela Park. I mean, if it's not for Mandela, there probably wouldn't be a lot of drivers. Derek Daly wouldn't be around, or David Kennedy, or Eddie Jordan. Mandela is that's the place to go. But people ask me about in my life how I got there. I only think about the good times, which are the good times are from 1980 to 1982. I won 6 championships in 3 years, and I just won so much that it's very hard to duplicate it again. But I was just starting to think about some of the stuff that I had to go through before those 2 years, starting in Mandela Park, because we had no money. And Mandela was like maybe 80 miles from my house, but back in Dundalk. But back in the day, it was a long drive because they're twisty roads. There was no highways, or there was no dual carriageways or nothing. It was just all the way to Mandela. I borrowed a Volkswagen van once and put the race car up in the back of the Volkswagen van. My friends lifted it up onto it, and it was sticking out the back. Drove to Mandela, got a ticket on the way for no license and no insurance. Driving across the track, I think it was PJ Fallon was coming around, because in those days you waited for a car to not come, and then you just go across the track to get the other side of the track. The engine of the Volkswagen van blew up going across the track. So everybody had to come out and push the van across the road. I did the race that weekend. I crashed the car. Now I've got a blown up van, crashed car. So everybody lifted the car back up on the van. My friend Morris Ruddy towed me home 75, 80 miles with a rope with his Morris Marina, 1.8 Morris Marina, towed me all the way home. It took 3 hours. My arms, I couldn't turn my arms when I got home. And I got out of the car and I went, God, I was just so tired. And I went to take the rope from underneath the car where I tied it. I tied it on the steering arm. So I bent the whole steering arm so the wheels would turn like that all the way home for 3 hours driving. It towed. And it was like, that was just one of the stories. I think I've got like 25, 30 of those stories. Same thing all the time.
Yeah, I mean, the friend that you mentioned there, Maurice Roddy, I mean, there's, for some people maybe watching or listening to this, they may have read your book from 2008, 2009, Crashed and Burned, the greatest racing driver you never saw. And then there was, of course, the documentary in 2016, Crash and Burn, which people can watch and gives a lovely taste of your life. But that friend, Maurice Roddy, something struck me from the movie particularly, that you mentioned different races you won and you know, a great career you had and plenty of trophies picked up because of your talent. A lot of the trophies are hiding in friends' attics or garages or basements, picking up dust at this stage. Was it the case that you just, in the moment, didn't care about the accolades? It was all about just winning the race, having a bit of fun, and that maybe the trophies and all the plaudits weren't as important to you, maybe?
The trophies for me weren't important, but it was important for my fans to get the trophies. So I would give them away to anybody. I remember I was at Silverstone once, and I threw one of the trophies down to one of the fans, and I guess he missed it and it fell and it broke on the ground, and the crowd started booing. It wasn't like I was against trophies. I just didn't keep anything. And in retrospect, like Maurice, obviously he's got them all at home for me, so he saved them for me, thinking that someday I might need them, and maybe my kids might need them. And for sure, I took a couple off him. But I give everything away. I give my driving suits away. I give my helmets away. Probably a couple of regrets would be I shouldn't have given everything away. I should have kept something for my kids, because they would like it.
You talk about liking to remember the particular period of your career, the early 80s. There was a time then when I guess you entered into the elitist world, if you want to call it that, of Formula One. And I know that was kind of a bittersweet thing for you. Probably sweet in that you made it that far, but bittersweet in that probably didn't get the recognition you deserved or the chance you maybe deserved in Formula One. So what was that like, going into that elitist world? It's probably the same today, Formula One, where the rich get richer and teams like Mercedes only get better and drivers with money get the drives. So do you look back on that Formula One period as particularly bittersweet?
I mean, obviously, there's not that many people get a chance to drive a Formula One car. And I did get in with one of the smaller teams, which usually, usually if you go into a bad team or a slow team in Formula One, the chance of getting into a good one are pretty slim. Back in the day, these days, they got a little better chance. But yeah, for sure. I mean, I won 6 championships in 3 years. Nobody's ever done it before or since. And then I got into the wrong Formula One team at the wrong time. And yeah, for sure, it probably took me, after it was all over, it probably took me like 15, 20 years to get over it. And until I could start a new life, because really that's what you're going for. And then once you make it to Formula One, that's the best in the world. There's no, what can you do after that?
A lot of people talk about the importance of an ego for someone like a motor racing driver. And one of the quotes that I had read in an interview you had done kind of struck me. And it was, I had such a belief in my ability, I was able to be not put down by engineers and mechanics, because the first thing people do in racing is they blame the driver. I was never having any of that. So how important was that to you, having that type of ego that it gave you the drive, if you'll excuse the pun, to be the best at your occupation? But also, how was that ego then particularly maybe part of missing out on different opportunities, and maybe people took you up the wrong way and your personality kind of maybe took away from some people's opinion of you?
Yeah, I mean, that can be said, but at the same time, I never had any trouble with any of the teams that I won races with or championships with. The only time I would have some trouble is some of the teams that I went to, and they didn't want to win. I mean, anybody who wanted to win they would love to have a Tommy Byrne or Ayrton Senna driving the car. I just knew. I don't know how I knew. I just knew that if something went wrong and I went slow, if I'm doing a certain time one day, and then half hour later I'm going half second slower, well, something went wrong, and it wasn't me. So I'd say, well, let's take a look at the notes here and see what happened. Something changed. And they would be quick enough to say that, just the driver's having a bad day. Drivers don't change. So lucky enough, I was able to do that. That's how I won my 6 championships. I know drivers that they were put down by the team and they wouldn't fight back. Well, they had no choice. They couldn't fight back. And they didn't win as many races. So, I mean, it's a good thing and a bad thing.
That man you mentioned, Ayrton Senna, perhaps one of Formula One's greatest drivers, certainly one of the most well-known drivers, we'll put it that way. In the documentary, you speak about how you would win a race and the following year Senna would come along and it was like he was the second coming of Christ, that he had won the same race as you had, but whereas you would get less plaudits perhaps. And I know you had spoken about how you were perhaps cocky, whereas he was arrogant. Well, what was the difference in those for you?
I joked around a lot. Ayrton Senna put everything into racing. All his life was racing. I mean, he just didn't sleep. He just wasn't a very happy person unless he was winning races. And I, on the other hand, I was still have a good time and have fun and still go out and win races. And so for sure, he deserved everything he got. He worked harder than me. If I had worked that hard, I could have won even more. But I just happened to come a little bit easier to me, and he wasn't very impressed with that because we worked for the same team. So we seen each other every day. But he was famous before he was famous. Mm. Yeah. He was famous in Formula Ford 1600. People were talking about him as the second coming of Christ before he even got there because of his aura, his family, where he came from, and his speed. The guy was just super fast.
One quote from Eddie Jordan was, "Forget Schumacher, forget Senna. Tommy Byrne was the best of them all." Some people don't like getting plaudits like that. They find it uncomfortable. Others take it in their stride and accept it and acknowledge that they had a serious talent. Where do you sit with quotes like that and with people saying things like that about you and your career?
Very uncomfortable. For sure. That was something that's obviously people use that, and the book and the DVD and the movie, that's been used a lot. I didn't say that. But all I know is at that time, back in the day, I wasn't afraid of Ayrton Senna.
And you're probably one of the only ones who weren't afraid of Ayrton Senna.
I was looking forward to the day we could race together. It just never happened. But I didn't go around saying that, I said it would have been a tough fight for sure.
It's an interesting one, and you mentioned that you were in one of the smaller teams in Formula One. Even to this day, you see the likes of Williams down at the bottom of the grid, and those drivers find it quite tough because if they come out of a race with points, they're doing very well. For you had the opportunity to do a test drive for McLaren, and I know Ron Dennis was over McLaren at that point. He had a bit of an edgy relationship with, or maybe no relationship at all, but just a couple of edgy encounters. But what was that like, that test drive? Because by all accounts, you performed extraordinarily well in the McLaren car when you got the chance to try out a proper Formula One car.
No, the McLaren was by far the best car I've ever driven. Remember, I was driving one of the cars that 4 cars used to go home. We didn't qualify, so you didn't get the race at all. And one of the cars was the one I was driving, which was the Theodore. I only got to qualify twice out of 5 times. And those guys, the team manager of the Theodore, his answer was, "Well, Tommy, you're just not a good enough driver. Keke Rosberg, if he was in your car, he'd be winning the race." I said, obviously you can imagine how that went down with me. I just lost my mind and told them what I thought. And they didn't want to win up. They didn't want to do any better. So I just said, "Come and watch me drive the McLaren, the real car." And I did get to drive the McLaren, and I did do everything right on that day. And I was very fast. And for some reason, they weren't that impressed, but a lot of people were. The car was so much better. The difference was I would have qualified in the front row of the British Grand Prix, whereas with my other car that I drove Formula One, I would have been last or maybe not even qualified. So that's the difference in a number 1 car in the world and one of the lower cars in the world. So at least I did get, in 2 months, I got to drive the best car in Formula One and the worst car in Formula One. So I did leave Formula One knowing that I could have done the job.
It's an interesting one, and I guess from looking up different drivers' backgrounds, the step from beginnings in race driving to Formula One is remarkably long. But for you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was only a matter of a short number of years between starting off as a race car driver and reaching that pinnacle. When you were running around Dundalk, did you, as a kid, did you ever think that's where you would end up? Did you ever aspire that that's where you would end up?
Most of the time, I just want to be a mechanic, a welder in America, because watching all the John Wayne movies at Christmas time, I just loved America. That's where I wanted to go. And I instead of going when I was 15, I was a welder mechanic, a diesel mechanic at 15 or 16 years of age. That's where I went after school. And I had a friend who went over there, and he told me about all the gold running down the roads and everything. So I figured, hey, better again. So I was heading for America. I would have went 16, 17 years of age. And then that's when I went and I drove that. I went to Mandela Park and drove the school car for the 15 laps, and that changed my whole life. All of a sudden, then now I want to be a race car driver. And then I did get to go to America, 1985. So I was about 10 years later I came over and started a new career. By the way, started again in Formula Ford 1600. And got all the way up to Indy Lights and just didn't make it to IndyCar. So I actually had two careers.
And the Indy Light stuff as well, and heading to America. I mean, were there ever any regrets? You say you always had the ambition to go to America. Were there ever any regrets that you had maybe gone to America too soon, that maybe you could have pursued the Formula One dream a little longer, as Eddie Jordan says in the documentary, or were you happy enough that this was the life for you and you were enjoying yourself over there?
When I got into Formula One, it wasn't what I expected, obviously, because you're used to winning races, and now you're last, and you get treated completely different. And nobody spoke to me except Niki Lauda and Nelson Piquet said hello. Everybody else just ignored me. So I wasn't that impressed with Formula One in the first place. And so once it didn't work out, straight away I was heading for America. I said, okay, I'm off. Eddie Jordan convinced me to stay for one more year, which I did. And I drove for him in Formula 3 again in Europe. And we were leading that championship. And we ended up finishing fourth. So I did hang on for one more year. And Eddie said, that he was obviously going to try to help. At that stage, Eddie there was no test teams at that stage. And then we did talk to Ken Tyrrell about driving his Formula One car, and he wanted £1 million. So I stayed for one more year. I actually stayed for 2 years. I drove for Gary Anderson in the European Formula 3 Championship. So I went to America probably a little later than I really would have. But I was just glad to get away from it.
You mentioned the cup that only a couple of the Formula One drivers said hello or hi to you. I mean, I'm reminded of different rivalries, and Alex Hurricane Higgins comes to mind as someone who put fear into Steve Davis. And Davis was on record as saying he was afraid of him and his character, and it's just because of his personality and the unpredictability of the Hurricane. Was there an element of that there was maybe people frightened to approach you, that you were this unknown entity from Ireland with a different background to the rest, who went about things differently, that partied and had women and just completely approached driving in a different way?
I don't know. I mean, maybe I didn't make that much effort to talk to them either when I got to Formula One, but I was only in it real briefly for like 5 races, and most of the time I was depressed because I knew my career was over because I wasn't qualifying. I was struggling just to get along with the team. So I really didn't care that much about them. But some of them actually I knew later on. Gerhard Bergman, those guys. I mean, I partied with them in Formula 3 before they got to Formula 1. So I don't know. I just think it was bad timing for me. The whole thing, wrong place, wrong time. The partying and stuff really didn't happen until after the Formula 1. That's when I just didn't give a fuck and just went for it. But before that, it really wasn't that. I was doing just about as good as anybody else when it came to. I was just happy. I was happy-go-lucky, laughing, joking. I could get into a car at the last minute and strap in and go out and beat everybody. And they'd already be sitting meditating for 10 minutes before that. And I knew what I was doing when it came to that. I was screwing with them a little. But it looked like I enjoyed it, like I was having too much fun. But deep down, inside, I still knew I had to win. It was very, very important. So maybe I give the wrong impression sometimes.
One anecdote from I guess the book and the movie and from your life that I guess sums up that difference in approach for Formula One drivers is there's a photo of yourself, I think, and it's Niki Lauda at an awards dinner, and you speak in the movie about how you had enough drugs in you to kill a buffalo. I mean, were those incidents and nights like that and the days thereafter, I guess, ever too much for you? Did you find it tough to kind of get up and motivate yourself after benders like that, or what was the partying like at that stage?
Well, I mean, after that, it was most of the time I went, well, that was obviously a one-off. That was a one-off, that Gillette thing. Somebody just handed me a bunch of cocaine and I took it. Because basically it was all over at that stage. I wasn't getting back to Formula One, so I really didn't care. But nobody knew. Nobody knew what was happening until I told in the book. I told it. Nobody had any idea that I was out of my mind. I took so much of it. I think it might have hurt me to this day. I mean, because it was speed. It wasn't cocaine. So at that stage, it was kind of, I knew it was all over. And so and then no, it was just, after that, it was just, I just wasn't as serious as I was before that when it came to, I did party. When I went to America is when I probably let my hair down, because then it was done. Then it was for sure. There was no more making fortunes in racing. It was just having, just get by, which I got by. I should have quit 10 years earlier and got a real job.
You had a short stint in Mexico as well, which was quite fascinating to read about, because in Mexico, I guess the money has to come from somewhere for drivers to perform and for money to be pumped into the cars. And I guess in Mexico, maybe you're not quite sure, as you would be in America or in the UK or Ireland, where the money is coming from. Can you tell people maybe who haven't heard the story about, was it Orcho, your friend Orcho, and an incident with him that ultimately led to you leaving Mexico and never going back?
Well, I went down to Mexico. I had no money, and I was married at this stage. I had my kids, and I went down there to sell a helmet. Now, I took my helmet with me, the last helmet I got from Bell, and it was all painted up. It was worth like probably $500. And I went down there. A guy, Alfonso Toledano, took me down there, and introduced me to Orcho. Just a weird, millionaire guy, just half out, like he wasn't quite right in the head, and introduced me to him. And yes, there was more guns involved. The very first day I met him, he had a gun out, and I was sitting in the back of the car. I thought he was going to shoot me because I didn't speak Spanish at the time. And he was talking to his buddy, looking at me with his stupid eyes, laughing at me and pointing the gun and just driving down the road. And it turns out all he wanted to do was, after a half hour of terror, which I thought I'm going to be shot in the middle of Mexico and nobody knows where I am, because nobody knew where I was at that stage, my wife, kids, and nothing. And half an hour of pointing the gun and talking to Pepe, the guy beside him, back and forth. And I thought, shit, I'm going to get shot in Mexico. Nobody knows where I am. There's no cell phones in those days. And turns out then he looked at me, and then looked away and looked at me and took the gun one more time and smiled. And he put the gun out the window of the car, and we're passing some cars. I thought, shit, he's going to shoot the family of people. It's not going to be me that's going to be shot. It's going to be somebody else. And then it turns out that all he was doing was shooting the signpost when he was going by, the stop sign or whatever. But not speaking the language and listening to them speaking in Spanish, I just thought they're going to shoot me on the side of the road. But so a year or so later, then he kind of became a sponsor and stuff, and he helped the team out, and because he liked me a lot, and so there was like orgies and stuff sometimes here. So there was a big orgy going on one day, and the girls came running downstairs to me looking for help from me, and he ran out with his gun naked, and I just wanted to know. Naturally, I just looked up and said, "What's your problem? What are you doing? ¿Qué pasa, amigo?" And he just took the gun. He shot at me twice, and we missed of it. He's a very bad shot, and he missed, and that's when I think that was 1994, and I locked myself in the room with all the girls, and next thing they all escaped at some stage during the night, because he was looking for his bullets, because I hid all the bullets. And so I got up the next morning, and I just got out of there, and I went to my other team owner, and I told him I need to get out of here because he's going to kill somebody, or he's going to kill me or whatever. So that's when I got a job in MidOhio. That was like 25 years ago.
Incredible. One of the comments that stood out for me as well was, at one point you say you lost out on $100 million, that's all. And I get the impression in the movie you say it with no regrets in your voice, just in a nonchalant way, like, I don't know, like you lost your car keys or something. But do you have any regrets looking back at the way your career panned out, or is it something that you just look back on with, that's done now, and my life now is all I focus on?
It's probably done. I mean, I did look back. I mean, obviously I partied for 20 years after it, but I'm not the only one. We used to meet other drivers that failed as well. I was just the most famous of them. And then I did a book and a DVD, and I actually told the truth of what happened in behind the scenes, but I tried to get over it, well, I'm definitely over it now. Well, I was over it till that movie. And that kind of brought it all back. So that's why I just told you, I only watched the movie one time. I can't watch it. I can't watch it again. But the $100 million, maybe it wasn't 100, but certainly if I had to stay in Formula One, it would have been easy 50 million. I mean, Hamilton's a billionaire.
Yeah. I mean, 20 years ago, I think it was 20 years ago, you formed this Crash and Burn Driver Development, and I know you're still working today in helping young drivers develop and starting out honing their skills, even of established drivers as well. So, when you look at drivers nowadays and you think back to how you started out, do young drivers now have what it takes, what you had, that things like fearlessness and confidence and courage? Is that a bit lacking in motorsport today?
When I came to America to become an instructor, by the way, it's pretty hard to be an instructor. It's, there's a lot of better instructors than me because there's just more to it. And I just thought that everybody knew how to brake and everybody knew how to turn, and there was a bunch of fast drivers around the world, and I just got lucky to be where I got. And as it turns out that I didn't find nearly anybody. I might have found, Peter Dempsey is a superstar. That's one of the ones I worked with. Other than that, I haven't found. So there's not that many. So I guess I wasn't lucky. I did have something different. It's very hard to find. I found another guy from Canada once, really like naturally talented driver. It's very hard to find them. And things have changed today. It's when I was doing it, it was desperation. I had to win. I had no choice but to win, or I never got the next race. So that whole 3 or 4 or 5 years, every time I did it, these days, they don't have that. They have to win because they don't get the next race because, usually somebody's paying for it and they're not going to get fired overnight, So that there's a little bit of a difference there. But yeah, it's completely different than when I did.
I mean, you're speaking to us today from Ohio, and I know you've done work over the years with the MidOhio driving school, and features prominently in the film as well. There's a quote that one of your colleagues at that MidOhio driving school says, maybe this place saved his life, that it came along at just the right time for you. How important was that job for you to get it at the time you got it? Because I know you were living a life of, I think your marriage had just broken up and you'd spoken of different struggles, but this job came along and it clearly was the perfect fit for someone like you.
Yeah, no, it worked out really good. It was Calvin Fish, actually, my friend Calvin, who we raced together in Europe, and he moved over here the year before I did. And that's when I left Mexico. I came back. My marriage was over. Lost my house. Basically, it was time. It was my time. As I said, I should have done it 10 years earlier, but I knew I wasn't going to get the $1 million racing. The big deal wasn't going to come now. And that's when I spoke to Calvin Fish, my friend Calvin, and he said, "Hey, come on up here." He was the chief instructor at MidOhio. So I went up there, and 25 years later, I'm still here. Not all the time, I do some days. I do like sometimes 50 days a year, sometimes 100 days a year. And I do, we got a company called Diablo Drifter Driving Academy down in Florida, which we do a dealership program for defensive driving for teenagers. So we do that a lot. And we sell Diablo Drifters that Gary Anderson designed for me. Diablo Drifter Drift Lift. We sell those in Indianapolis. Me and my Senna's mechanic, Dave Meehan's my partner now from 40 years ago. So it's amazing. The whole thing kind of comes full circle.
Extraordinary. I guess to go from a life of partying in the 80s to your life now, and I'd read somewhere that you had become quite obsessed with mountain biking as a passion in recent years. Is that something you're still doing, or?
Yeah. As soon as I get off this Zoom call, I'm going off mountain biking today. Today I've got a day off today, so I'm going to mountain bike and I'm going to road bike. I actually want to report in the over 55 Florida Championship done this year.
Still obsessed with speed then?
I've ridden 2 hours and 45 minutes endurance in mountain biking, which I've never thought I would ever be able to do that.
That's extraordinary.
My biggest problem is I'm trying to beat people, kids. I'm trying to beat 30-year-olds, and that's just not going to happen. I can't.
So life is good then. I mean, you have your own grown-up kids now, and you have that life in America that you always wanted. So a two-parted question: life is good, I assume, and secondly, do you ever get to come home to Dundalk?
Oh, I do, absolutely. I'll be coming home more. The best thing about the book and the DVD and the documentary is I get to go home more. So I've been getting sometimes 2-3 times a year, and I got to travel Ireland. So I've been all over Ireland, whereas I left in 1978, I never even got to see it. So it's great. And I get to go home. My favorite race of the year is the 6-hour Fiesta race in Mandela Park. And it's usually in November time. And I go home and I race with David Kennedy, my friend David. And so I've done it with him 2 years. We've led both years, and we failed to win the race. So hopefully with the COVID thing, I get to go back over again this year for the 3rd time. And Michael Fassbender might actually come race with us. I met him a couple of. So we're working on that. But hopefully if I can get there because of COVID, that's it. That's the race I look forward to. And in Mandela Park, those guys, they just run you off the track. They don't even care who it is. If it's Tommy Byrne or Michael Fassbender or David Kennedy, when you go to pass somebody, you know they're going to do something. You can't just drive by them. It's going to be a fight. And you can be racing a 16-year-old to a 70-year-old in that race. It's crazy. And they're all fast.
Incredible. Well, I guess mondelopark.ie for anyone who wants to drive that track or do one of those driving experiences for themselves or for a group. But listen, Tommy, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. Crash and Burn is the name of the documentary for anyone who wants to watch it, or indeed the book as well. People can check out. But listen, Tommy Byrne, it's been a pleasure to speak with you, and hopefully we'll check in again with you soon.
Sorry, Shane, a couple of things. The book is you can get the book from Irish Vintage Scene. That's the only place you can get in Ireland, I think. And a big shout out to John Campion, CJJ Motorsports. John is struggling in the hospital right now over here in America, and prayers for him. He's a really good friend of mine and a great friend of Irish racing.
Absolutely. Best wishes to John. Well said, Tommy. Put us in there. Thanks a million for taking the call.